difficult decisions are coming. He's ruled out plenty of other taxes, but he won't, he can't, he will not rule out the death tax. It's a tax that the public has rejected, not once, not twice, but 4 separate times. Yet still Andy Burnham seems to return to it. Why? Not just because he wants to change social care, no. If that was his sole aim, there are other ways to fund it, like cutting foreign aid or benefits for migrants. No. He's shown again and again that he thinks the savings that you've earned, no matter how little, that you've scrimped and saved for, that you've been taxed on, whether you're rich or poor, he says the taxman deserves a bit more.
Only a matter of weeks into the job, and Britain's brand new Prime Minister has already found a way to tax something that has never once happened twice to anybody in the entire history of these islands. Dying. Not once, not ever. And yet somehow this government has decided that is the moment to send round the collection tin. Good day and welcome to British Insider. Today we are looking at Andy Burnham's so-called universal death tax, the policy that could define his premiership before it has even properly begun. Quick favor before we carry on. If you are enjoying this channel, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Over 92% of people watching right now have not done that yet. It costs nothing, takes about 2 seconds, and means a great deal to this channel. Thank you if you did. Right, back to the story.
No one doubts that Andy Burnham possesses more charm than Keir Starmer. I know that's a low bar. But have we stopped to ask, what is he actually selling? On the big questions so far, there's a bunch of false promises and fantasy ideas that he can fix social care and worry about the costs another time, or that he can grow the economy in every postcode for British people, but water down immigration reforms to let in some more cheap migrant workers. And finally, that 700 people can cross the channel in small boats yesterday, tens of thousands this year, and that means his government's plan is actually working. He's like Labour's answer to the Pied Piper. He's playing an enticing tune, but actually leading them and our country into more desperate trouble. I'm not surprised that Nigel Farage was the only party leader that Andy Burnham wouldn't invite to discuss his idea. Despite the fact that reform provides £8 billion of social care through the 30 councils that we run. Because Andy Burnham knows, rightly to be fair, that Nigel will never go along with a betrayal of people who've paid in their whole lives. And make no mistake, that is what Andy Burnham is planning to do. That is the purpose of the talks that the other parties are now engaged in. Andy Burnham says that difficult decisions lie ahead. But let's be honest, that is Westminster politicians speak for tax rises lie ahead. Why not just be straight with people? Going after hard-working Brits on modest salaries with only a little in savings is the exact opposite of what reform stands for. We stand for protecting British workers and putting them first. And as people begin to consider what this means for them and their family, many will understandably be very worried. Why can't he be straight with them? Why can't he just say what he is actually planning to do? Why cause them all this uncertainty and worry? Let me tell you how a universal death tax would actually work. Why this is a cruel and punitive tax.
Here is the situation. Mr. Burnham, freshly installed in Downing Street after Keir Starmer's abrupt exit, is reviving an idea he first floated back in 2009 when he was Health Secretary, a flat 10% levy on every single estate, with no threshold and no exemptions, all in the name of funding a new national care service. Under the current rules, a married couple can pass on up to £1 million without the taxman getting involved at all. Under this new plan, that protection disappears entirely. Suddenly, around 650,000 additional families a year, families who currently pay nothing whatsoever in inheritance tax, get pulled straight into the net. Let us start with the practical problem, because this policy barely survives contact with reality. Estates are messy: farms, family businesses, half-finished house sales, disputed wills. Charging a flat rate on all of it, regardless of size, hits a modest bungalow exactly as hard as a mansion, proportionally speaking. That's not fairness. That's a blunt instrument dressed up as reform, rather like using the same size spanner to fix a bicycle and a bus and then acting surprised when one of them falls apart. Now for the part that actually stings, the human cost. Picture a widow in a modest 3-bedroom home, worth perhaps £250,000, the product of 40 years of careful saving alongside a husband who has just passed away. Under this scheme, her children inherit a tax bill on money the family already paid tax on the first time around, arriving in the post at precisely the moment they are still arranging a funeral. Picture the nurse, working nights on a modest wage, suddenly facing a levy on the only asset her parents ever managed to build. This is not a tax on billionaires hiding wealth offshore. This is a tax on grief, timed to the very worst moment of somebody's life. Which brings us to the alternative, because criticizing is easy, building something better is the actual job. The argument from Reform UK and from a growing number of voters simply exhausted by Westminster is straightforward. Fund social care properly by ending the reliance on imported labour that has kept care worker wages artificially low for years. Pay British carers a fair, decent wage and root out the staggering waste already buried inside NHS and council budgets before reaching for another raid on ordinary families. Hand more of the actual decisions and the actual budgets to local councils who understand their own communities, rather than one Whitehall spreadsheet trying to apply a single number to every postcode in the country. Genuine fairness does not mean monetizing bereavement. It means fixing the plumbing before flooding the house with more water. Now, to be fair to the other side for a moment, the social care funding gap is entirely real, forecast to reach nearly £40 billion by the end of the decade, and simply refusing to fund it solves nothing either. That's a genuine dilemma, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But dishonesty is precisely what critics accuse Westminster of here, quietly reviving a policy that failed once already under a different name, hoping voters won't remember the last time it was tried. Reform UK has already vowed to fight this every step of the way, framing it as proof that Britain's political class still believes your savings belong to the taxman first and to your family second. Whatever side of this debate you land on, one thing is certain: the fight over what you are allowed to leave behind has only just begun. Thank you very much for watching British Insider. We'll see you in the next one.
Today, whatever its faults, and clearly inheritance tax has many, it at least has a threshold. So that means that if you saved a little over the years, hundreds of pounds, a few £1,000s, or indeed a larger amount, up to £325,000 as an individual, you can pass that on to your family. Andy Burnham's levy is different. It has no threshold, no allowance, no minimum limit whatsoever. Everything goes in. The family heirlooms, your mother's wedding ring, if you've got a watch to hand on, and nothing else, it's taxed. A couple of pieces of jewelry, taxed. Even clothes, taxed. Think what that means. Think what that means for the least well-off families in this country. An estate of a few £100s in a post office account. A bit of furniture, the sofa, the telly, a small policy would somehow have to be catalogued, valued, and assessed. By who? Solicitors? Probate valuers? Officials? What, people charging fees for the smallest estates? The cost of the assessment alone might swallow the inheritance in whole. The state would spend £500 to take £300. Grieving families would undoubtedly be dragged through months of paperwork for the privilege of being left with next to nothing. And remember, this is the important point. Brits are already amongst the most heavily taxed people on earth when we die. Of the 38 OECD nations, Britain already runs the 5th harshest death tax regime. Nearly half of those countries don't tax children's inheritance at all, and rightly so. Australia scrapped death duties. Canada scrapped them. Even Sweden scrapped them because they raised very little, because they were despised, because they destroyed a lot. And Andy Burnham looks at all that. He looks at all of that and concludes, you know what? Britain doesn't tax death enough. To raise the £18 billion he needs for his plans, this tax would need to sit on top of the inheritance tax levied on the rich. That means together, Burnham's death tax and our existing inheritance tax would cost families almost £30 billion a year. Britain would become the single worst place to give money to your kids in the Western world. And it would be worse than that, because it would also make the UK the only country in the whole of the West to tax all savings with no allowance whatsoever. This is a truly extreme proposal. Is this the make-a-feel test that we were promised by Andy Burnham when he was out on the stump? Well, take a nurse. Take a nurse in Makerfield who's worked her whole life in the NHS. She passes away. Maybe she passes away far too young, only a few years after retiring. She owns a house in Makerfield worth £200,000. She's not rich, but she worked hard and she saved for that home. She gets a lump sum of £100,000 on death from the NHS pension scheme. Under the current rules, none of that would be taxed. And I think we can all agree, quite right so. But under Andy Burnham's death tax, her children would have to pay £30,000 to the taxman, plus the form filling, the worry, the things they'd have to do when they should be grieving for their lost mother. I sometimes wonder if people in the political and media establishment think people are swimming in money out there in the real world. Most people don't inherit very much money at all. And the poorest in society inherit very small sums. But it makes a very big difference to their lives, particularly at times like this, where people are finding life tough. In fact, when the poorest 20% get an inheritance, it makes up 44% of their wealth. Are you going to tax that and make their family account for it to HMRC? And who would actually pay for it? It's not going to be the rich. The rich have family offices. They have offshore structures. They have accountants on retainers. They will have planned their way around this levy long before the bill has even reached its first reading in Parliament.